everybody. I am Tara Elliott. I am the director of Eastern Shore Writers Association, welcoming you today to our Thursdays with ASWA programming. And we have an amazing program for you tonight with one of our board members, Caroline Kalfas. And I'm going to introduce Caroline, and she is an awesome writer, and I know you'll like her work very much if you get a chance to read her. She writes from Woolwich Township in New Jersey. Her poetry and essays have appeared in various literary magazines, including The Next Chapter, Frog Pond, Philadelphia Stories, Green Prints, and several editions of our very own Beta Ocean Journal. In 2022, she received third place in the 9th annual Golden Haiku Poetry Competition in Washington, D.C. She is a student in the Newport MFA program at Sal Regina University in Rhode Island. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Caroline Kalfas.
Oh gosh, thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thanks for inviting me to speak at Thursdays with ASWA. I'm really excited that so many people have come out to talk about novels and stories. This form of writing goes all the way back to Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. Most of us have read a novel and stories and maybe didn't realize that's what we were reading. Some of the books you might recognize that are written in this form are Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, Maid Benchy's The Copper Beech and Silver Wedding, that's another one, and then Alice Hoffman's Blackbird House and The Red Garden are also novels and stories. So tonight I have a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to show. And then also I'm hoping, my goal is that when we leave tonight that you'll be able to recognize a novel and stories and maybe have some fun trying to write one yourself. So I'll start my PowerPoint.
Click the green share screen button down at the bottom.
Okay. I did that. Should I hit share?
Go ahead and hit share and let's see what happens.
Okay. Yes, this is it.
Oh, we're not. There we go. Now we're seeing it. Everything's perfect.
Okay. All right. So let's start. I'm going to open it all up so you can see it. Well, this is the worksheet. Okay, and here's the thing. Okay, so we're going to start what I'm going to share in my PowerPoint. I'm going to share the definition of a novel and story, the traits of a novel and story, examples, benefits, and connection tools. And then I thought we could just try to write one, do some brainstorming together to write some ideas. So can you see my PowerPoint? Okay. So what defines a novel and stories? A novel and stories is a book of fiction that connects standalone short stories with common threads to create a complete novel. So we have the short story plus a short story plus a short story plus a short story equals the complete novel. And then there's webs of information that connect them. It doesn't have to be 4 short stories. It can be any amount you choose, but they do have to be able to stand alone and not depend on each other. What a novel and stories is not, it's not a collection of short stories, and it's not an anthology of short stories. It has certain traits, and these are 5 traits that a novel and stories has. I'm going to go over the 5 main traits, and then we'll go over them one at a time. So the traits of a novel and stories, it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It must include, well, it most include a table of contents to help the reader. Sections are standalone short stories, not traditional chapters. A question arises early in the novel that affects more than one character and repeats in all the stories, and it also has a connecting vein. Okay, so trait number one, the book has to have a beginning, middle, and an end. With a collection of short stories or an anthology, readers can randomly open the book and read whatever stories interest them. They don't have to read the stories in order. But to understand a novel and stories, the book has to be read in order from front to back. You can't skip around. The reason is just like a regular chapter novel, each sentence you read builds on the next one. So you're building to create the final lesson. So you can't leave something out. Okay, I'm going to use Dirty Love by Andre Dubus III as my example as I go through these traits. So his novel is written in 4 sections. Listen carefully as our options have changed. Marla, the bartender, Dirty Love. Although each is a standalone story itself, it would not make sense if Andre started his book with the bartender. The story only makes sense if it is read in order. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand or let me know. Okay, so the second trait is the book often provides a table of contents to help the reader. So Andre does do that. He has a table of contents listing all of the stories in the front. The sections are standalone short stories, not traditional chapters. Each story in Dirty Love by Andre has a beginning, middle, and end. And you could read it outside of the novel and really enjoy the story. But together in the novel, you enjoy the book. Okay, and the fourth trait, the author presents a question early in the novel that affects more than one character and repeats in each story. So Dubus does this question is about the purity of love and have examples from each of the chapters, which we don't have to read, but I wanted you to know in each of the books. And then the fifth trait is the book has to have a connecting vein. And Dubus uses the connecting vein of betrayal and relationships in Dirty Love. So I want to recap what we've learned. A novel and stories is a book of fiction that connects standalone short stories with common threads to create a complete novel. And the traits are a beginning, middle, and end. Most of the time, a table of contents. Section, a question early in the novel affects more than one character and repeats in each story. And the book has a connecting vein. Okay. Are there any questions or anything so far?
We had a couple of questions in the chat. Somebody asked if Sherwood Anderson's book, Winesburg, Ohio, would be considered a novel and stories. And yeah, I looked it up just to make sure because it's been a while since I've read it, but yes, I think it is. And Robin Wynne-Fallis asked if Moby Dick is considered a novel and stories. And I don't think it would be.
I don't think Moby Dick would be considered one because because the characters in each chapter are not separate. Like in a novel and stories, the characters in your first story don't appear in your second story. And if they do, they appear kind of in and out. They don't stay there and continue throughout the whole book. And we can look at that in a few slides later when we look at our worksheet, if that'll help.
And Nan is asking if you will make the PowerPoint slides available after the session tonight.
If there's a certain one that you want to look, you can email me and I can send it to you, but probably not the whole PowerPoint. But if there's a page you really need to look at again, I'll be glad to. Okay. So what are some examples of novels and stories? The Ohio book is a good example. Other examples I wanted to show you. One is The School of Essential Ingredients, written by Erica Bauermeister. She takes a cooking class. She creates a cooking class, and then each section, she tells the story of the members of the cooking class. And that's how she frames her book and stories. She's actually how I got interested in novels and stories. I really liked the way she took this one class and then explored each person's story separately, but yet kept them all connected and then put thread through to connect them together to make the novel. I noticed I got an email recently that she's written another novel and stories that's coming out in May, and it's called No Two Persons. And she's billing it as a novel and stories. And she says 1 book, 9 readers, and 10 changed lives. So that's how she's approaching a novel and story. Another example is Whitney Otto's How to Make an American Quilt. She uses a quilting bee and a group of ladies who quilt together to frame her story. And what's interesting to me about her book is in between each of the sections, she writes about quilting. So it almost frames the story like sashing and a quilting frames each of the squares. So I thought that was interesting. And this book became a movie. So there you go. If you write one, you could have a movie. And then another one is the Pulitzer Prize winning Olive Kitteridge. That's a novel and stories. And it also became a movie. And so many people have told me that they had a hard time getting through this book, that it was hard to read or they gave up. And I wondered if it was because if she had said this is a novel and stories, then you might have a better understanding of how the book's put together. And so maybe each chapter that you read would have made more sense, but I don't know. I didn't know about novels and stories when I read it and was struggling. But now that I do, I understand that each story is a separate story, a standalone story. And she connected her book with the character Olive Kitteridge. And then the last one I'm going to mention is Joan Silber's book, Improvement. I wanted to bring this one up because the critic of her book, or someone who, the reviewer, Ruth Franklin, she described it as a connect the dots narrative structure. And I think that exactly fits what you're trying to do with a novel and stories. You're trying to connect dots throughout each section. And it's just a very nice description. Okay. Are there any other questions? No. So why would an author want to write a novel and stories? So one reason would be that it mimics life. I think about the connections that are in the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Like we all know people in our lives, like someone will say, oh, do you know this person? And we don't know them, but we know who they are. And I think in a novel and stories, these kind of connections are running throughout the book because maybe the person in the second story is mentioned in the first story, but we don't really go over their story, their life. And anyway, so the second reason you might want to write one is because of the different perspectives. People react differently to the same question. So you can see the different reactions to the same question in 4 different short stories, but they can all connect. And then in a novel and stories, you have a familiar setting. So you don't have to make up different settings like you might if you were doing a collection of stories. You can stay in the same setting. And then the ripple effect is the consequences ripple in the community. So are there any questions? Are y'all ready to use these tools in our writing?
I think we're ready, Caroline.
You're so quiet. All right. Well, let's brainstorm. Okay.
So how would you like brainstorming to happen? Would you like people to write into the chat window? Would you like them to write independently and then share? Or how would this best work for you?
I think if they want to write in the chat window, that'll be fine.
Okay,
That'll be
great.
interesting. If they want to share, you don't have to share, but if you want to share this, I sent this worksheet out. And if you have it, that's great. If you don't have it, don't worry, because you can just take notes on your piece of paper. It's just something to kind of help organize. And if you're a pantser or a plotter, don't worry, because we're not outlining the story. We're just brainstorming about what kind of novel and story we could write.
Before you begin, Laurel asks, can you tell us more about how the theme or the thread runs through the stories?
Yes. So I'm going to change it. I think looking at it, at what Andre does, maybe this will help a little bit. So I'll go over this. We're going to do this same worksheet, but if maybe this will help. So Andre begins with a question with his book. It says, what happens when love turns messy? So that's basically what his book is about. And he has a table of contents. He has 4 stories. Listen Carefully, Marla, The Bartender, and Dirty Love. So in the first story, Listen Carefully, the first story is about a married couple named Mark and Laura Welch, and they're dealing with the consequences of Laura's affair with a local banker. So that whole story is about Mark and Laura and their struggles with their marriage because of this affair. So in the second story in the book, we learn about, it's a story about Marla, who's a teller who works at the bank, and she falls in love and marries one of the bank customers. And she gains love, but she loses herself in marriage. But there's a connection. The connection here is we have the banker, and then we have Marla, who's a teller that works at the bank. But in the first story, Marla doesn't appear in the first story. She has nothing to do with this story. And she has her own story. And then in the third story, The Bartender, an upholsterer who rents a basement shop from 2 blonde bank tellers, almost loses her baby when she finds out her husband, a failed poet and bartender, is having an affair with a head waitress. So again, we have this connection to the bank. So we have, in Marla's story, the 2 blonde bank tellers might attend a party that she and her husband attend, but they kind of come in and out. They don't stay in the story. They have their, they just are a connecting thread. Does that help answer?
I think it helps me. Let me see. Laurel, does that help you understand a little bit more? She says yes with triple exclamation points. So I'm guessing that she really got it.
Okay, good. I know it's hard for me to talk about a book that that everybody hasn't read, but hopefully it'll make sense as we keep going and as we play around with it. I don't know. And I'll just go ahead and finish the fourth story, Dirty Love. There's a young girl. She works at the same restaurant as the bartender and the head waitress. And but she lives in shame after teen boys film her doing what she felt was a private moment with the boy, and they post it online. So, but the connecting thread is this bartender and waitress, and that's how she's connected to the third story. But
so to me, it kind of works like if I put it in movie terms, because I'm not a huge short story reader, although I have read Andre Dubois, is that how you say his name?
yes.
Before, and I really liked him. But like if I think about movies that I love, like Mystic Pizza would be considered a novel and stories in screen regard, because of the fact that they tell all the different stories about the girls, but it's really centralized about the Mystic Pizza shop. Or Steel Magnolias would be considered like a novel in stories, because you're seeing all the different kind of stories going on about the women as it tells the story. At least that's where I'm interpreting it.
Yes, I'm not sure if Steel Magnolias would count, just because they interact together throughout the whole novel.
Oh, somebody said Love Actually. Yeah, I can see that totally,
Oh.
Monique. That was a really good point.
That's true.
And then Monique asked, do the threads converge? And I'm guessing that's up to the writer.
Yeah, I think some threads do converge and some kind of go everywhere. So it's wherever your spider wants to connect, I think.
Wendy, I think that answers your question too. Wendy asked, so the characters in the other story show up in the last story. And I think that's ultimately up to the writer.
They shouldn't really show up in the last story unless they're in and out, because they have to stand alone. They each stand alone without the people you see in the other stories, they don't show up at the last story. I don't know. It stands alone also. So we won't see Mark and Laura in the Dirty Love story. Okay. But there's other common threads we can that the writer uses, that Dubois uses. He puts them all in the same setting. He puts all the stories, they take place in coastal towns in Massachusetts. And then he has some repeats. So each story, you'll see maybe references to cigarettes or parking lots, bare feet, TV screens, video games, cleaning, a woman's hair coming loose, Coca-Colas and bikinis. You'll find those in each story. It's kind of weird. And then he also he connected with the literary devices of writing. In his first story, he wrote, Mark wanted his wife to write a letter to end her affair. And then in the second story, Marla wrote her phone number to exchange, to get her first date. And the bartender is a failed poet. He's writing poetry. And then in Dirty Love, the young girl, she needs to write an essay, and her uncle's trying to help her. And then she ends up writing a goodbye note to her uncle and leaves. But he connects the stories in those ways. Does it make sense? Should I keep going? Okay, let's work on one together. So first we need a question. So think of a topic that you might want to explore. I was thinking maybe love, faith, illness, or the environment, and you can form a question. So Dubois's question was, what happens when love gets messy? I'm going to make up a story that asks, are the consequences of indulging in sugar worth the pleasure? That's going to be my question. And I'm going to make up, I'm going to kind of create, brainstorm for ideas with that question. So maybe you could take 2 minutes and think about what question you might want to explore if you're writing a novel and stories. And if you can't come up with your own question, you can use mine. You can type them in the chat if you want to share.
So we have some coming into the chat. And let's see. Tamara says Chicago. Mary said, who stole the money? Wendy said, what if you no longer have the security of a home? Hay asks, what happens when people are late for an important appointment? Stasia says, is it better to know you're dying or to die unexpectedly? Sorry, so morbid. Michael says, a couple never lived totally together, decide to move to a new city. Donna said, I sometimes think of a connected story of the four cars at an intersection. Anna said, what if you witnessed a miracle? Oh, I like that one, Anna. Sandra says, how can magic bring us together?
Oh, this
And Tamara asks, how are the Romanov czars interconnected?
Ooh, okay. Oh, I'm excited. Y'all all have an idea. So now that you have some ideas about what you want to ask about, now you can decide what you want to put in your table of contents. Now, Andre has 4 chapters. Elizabeth Strout has 14 chapters. But I thought maybe we could just do 3 chapters for our example. And we already went through Andre's 4 chapters that he had. I'm thinking about using a patient, a dentist, and a chocolatier's point of view, the 3 different points of view, to sort of organize my chapters. And remember the essential ingredients. She used the characters in her cooking class. The quilting bee ladies were different chapters. So you can really organize it any way that you want. And you can share in the chat if you want, but you don't have to.
Couple more questions that were here were DJ said, where are all the people on the train going? And Tara Lee said, what are the reasons different families adopt dogs? Robin asked, who in your neighborhood composts?
Oh, I like that there's so many different ideas and they're going in all kinds of directions. And you don't have to worry too much because we're brainstorming and it's going to change. Like, no, it always changes, but it's fun to think about what you could write about. Does everybody sort of have 3 chapters that they're thinking about?
Wendy asks, well, for what if you don't have the security of a home? Characters could be a homeless person, an immigrant, a traveler, someone who loses their home due to climate.
Yes.
And Steve asked, can a change in the weather from today to tomorrow kill you? I love that. That is fantastic.
Okay.
I think everybody's creating right now.
Okay. Does everybody have their characters now or their table of contents for our make-believe stories? Okay. Okay, so now I think there's no really special order, but I think it's fun to start thinking about the thread and the setting. So Andre played all of his relationships in small towns along her, used her cooking class as her setting for all of her students, and Otto used her quilting bee for her setting. So for me, I think I'm going to set a thread of golf throughout all 3 stories. And I'm going to create a setting of a triangle between a dentist's office for the patient, a golf course for the dentist point of view, and a chocolate shop. So you can think of something that you want to thread in every story that kind of is going to hold them all together, connect them, and then a setting where you wanted everything to take place. And the setting doesn't have to be the same place, but like the bankers, it was good to set them all in the New England towns. They didn't all have to be at the same bank or anything like that, but it was good to keep them all in one setting.
And we have some stuff rolling into the chat window. Robin says, the question about composting, one neighbor says, I have no time to do that. Another asks, how do I get started? Another says they recycle and don't composting a necessity for them to do it. Tamara said for the book about the Romanovs setting Moscow and St. Petersburg, thread relationships between fathers and sons and between rulers and their people. Wendy said setting human service offices, cafe where they hang out, subway station or bus. I could write many stories that take place on public transport, put many hours on the bus to good use. And Stasia says, dying book, thread is a health and happiness, also quality of life, and setting could be big, city hospital and surrounding neighborhoods. Robin says her
I think the
composting- I'm sorry, go ahead, Caroline.
oh no, I was thinking of the bus story, and I was thinking that Olive Kitteridge came up with 14 different stories for her book, and said that sounds like the bus would have possibility for many stories like Olive Kitteridge. I guess Elizabeth Strout came up with the stories. Okay. Well, now I think it comes to the fun part, and I think some of y'all have already been thinking about this. We're going to work on what our first short story should be about. So Andre's was about the couple who were trying to figure out what to do after her infidelity with the banker. Okay, so I'm going to write about this girl named Candy Sweettooth because I'm trying to think of the consequences of indulging in sugar and if they're worth the pleasure. And Candy, she chips a molar while biting into an almond chocolate that she uses to celebrate Valentine's Day and is practicing putts at the golf course. Is practicing putts at the golf course instead. And so she ends up spending her holiday with a dentist who suggests she invests in romantic endeavors with people instead of chocolate. I don't know. It's just a silly one. So what short story do you want to write? It could be silly or it could be serious. It's whatever you, it depends on your project. But the two things to remember is that the story has to stand alone. Like if you're going to finish the beginning, middle, and end of this story, and it's not going to repeat. The main characters can have a link to the other stories, but they're not going to be main characters in the stories again. You're not going to thread them like a regular novel in various chapters. This story is going to start with its beginning, middle, and end, and it's not going to, the characters aren't going to be interacting in the other two stories. They might make an appearance, but they're not going to be interacting with the characters.
Caroline, we've had a request that people would like to see, I'm guessing, Andre Dubos's example again.
Sure. This one. Can you see?
No, I think, there you go. You got it now.
Okay. Whoops, I'm sorry. I was trying to move it over so that
It looks fine to us over here.
okay. Did everybody have enough time to write their first idea? Okay. So now I think it might be fun to go ahead and write this second story. I'll bring this slide back up, but here my second story. So from the dentist's point of view, I'm going to have the dentist. Now, the dentist in the first story, he just kind of popped in, gave her some Novocaine, and left. But so in the second story, he arrives at the golf course. He's irritated because his game was delayed from it because of an emergency patient. And he's going to play 9 holes of golf instead of 18 with his childhood friend Skittles, who collected more Handy Halloween than Hershey's cells when they were growing up. And Skittles keeps clicking his dentures in between holes and drinking his 6-pack of sodas. So we're going to see how that goes with the consequences of sugar. But this is going to be a standalone story, and Candy Sweet Tooth and Bogey are not going to appear in this story. And just like Skittles doesn't appear in the first story, this is a standalone story with the connection of the dentist. So, does that make sense? So maybe after we write our second stories, maybe I can come out from the worksheet, and if someone's willing to share what their first story was and their second story. Can share that.
But a couple of earlier comments in the chat, Steve said, weather change, will it kill you? TOC equals aircrafts. The turkey fryer was a person, old coaches and new relationships. The threads were personal growth and financial growth, losses and gains. The setting was a high-rise, multiple parties over the course of about 7 years. And then Anna said, miracle novel, first story, a woman named Tiffany runs away from her abusive boyfriend and ends up at a construction site. She's almost killed by an earthquake when an angelic figure rescues her. The event is witnessed by multiple people. Anna said the thread is relationships and the setting is the suburbs.
Oh, nice.
He wrote, Fred is being late for an appointment, setting is a hospital. The first story, a woman with a complicated pregnancy feels the fetus is not moving as much on the day of her appointment with maternal fetal OB specialist. Husband driving her to the hospital, massive traffic jam. She has a panic attack. When they arrive an hour late, the OB reassures her and checks her out. Baby is fine, but her blood pressure is up, so she has to be admitted to the hospital.
Okay. So that's the first story?
Okay, you want to unmute and explain?
Yeah, that's the first story. Are we doing the second story yet?
Yes.
Okay.
But just remember, it's going to be completely different story. Like the people in the first story aren't going to be there, but there's going to be a thread. Does that make sense? Okay. And what was your question too that you're exploring?
Well, I guess my question is what happens when people are late for appointments, sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if you're still working. Does anybody want to share what their first and second stories are? Or Monique, I see your hands up.
Monique, did you want to share? You had your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had my hand up about something else, but I'm happy to share. My central question is it true that nothing says loving like something from the oven? Okay, and that was precipitated by Caroline's sweet tooth person. So I have a fancy baker who has a cooking show photographed in her Westchester country home. Her specialty is chocolate pastries, and the successive stories are by people who watch her show who are related to one another.
And that's the first chapter?
The first chapter is Fancy Baker. She has a cooking show.
Okay, so the first chapter is about Fancy Baker, who has the cooking show, and then the second chapter is about the people who are watching her cooking show.
Right, and we have Tom and Nancy, and they're fans, and they entertain and use her recipes, having perfected them, and their specialty is chocolate babka, and then.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is just the preliminary.
Oh, we're just brainstorming, thinking of things that might be fun to write about. So.
And then the next one is Joan Simmons, who's Tom's mother. And they live far apart from each other, but she also watches Fancy Baker's show and makes treats like chocolate cake and chocolate turtles and takes them to, she uses them to connect with people.
Okay. And each of those stories too, each story is going to need a beginning, a middle, and then like a conflict within itself, right?
Yeah.
So you'll come with that. Yes. Did you have a question too?
No.
No. Okay. I don't know. Does anybody else want to share their first and second chapters, or I don't know. Is this a fun exercise to kind of think of different things you could create your novel with, or is it hard, or is it fun, or is it?
Sorry, I thought I was talking unmuted. I see a lot of people writing, like actively writing. So I think that that's a good
Okay.
thing, Caroline. I know the silence can be a little intimidating sometimes, but I think everybody's writing right now.
Okay, good. It's hard for me to see what's going on out there.
Well, let's do this. Let's just kind of say that we're going to come back at 8:45 to share, and that way people can continue to write, and that way they can brainstorm and share all of the different stories that they come up with at around 8:45.
Okay, I'll put up Gary's slide, Andre's slide. Where is Andre's slide?
And somebody did ask the question, Tamara did, and then Joe did as well. Does having multiple stories about one character disqualify the book from being considered a novel in short stories?
I don't think so. If you look at Olive Kitteridge, that whole book is about Olive, and each story is a separate story, but Olive's in each of the stories. Yeah, Olive is in each of the stories, so she's a thread throughout that whole book. So I think it could happen.
All right, and Caroline, we are about time to head back in. So those people that are writing, if you guys want to poke your head up, and if you want to share, you're welcome to raise your hand to share. If you'd like to share out loud, you're welcome to write it in the chat window and I will share for you. And we had a couple of notes in here that we didn't get to. So Wendy said, first story, immigrant misses his appointment on the human service office due to getting on the wrong bus, ends up at a cafe where their birthday party's in progress, and he meets someone who changes his life. On his way out, he hands a cake to a homeless person in the doorway. Second story, the homeless person who earlier in the day was at the human service office couldn't get help because he had no address. He's on the bus to the shelter after enjoying his cake when he finds enough money to get a hotel room for the night. And Joanne said, Sandra Cisternos, an early novel and short stories, and had the same point of view narrator throughout. If she's remembering, it's the house on Mango Street. And you're absolutely right. She asked if that was right. You're absolutely right, because I have taught that with my students.
Oh,
And Eve said, oh, we already answered Eve's question about the timing. Anna said, miracle novel second story. Elena is one of the people who witnessed Tiffany's rescue. She's been dating around a long time and considers settling down with her current boyfriend. The boyfriend is claiming that he loves her, but he won't propose. Elena eventually decides to break up with him and keeps looking for Mr. Right. During the story, it's mentioned that Tiffany's former boyfriend has been arrested. And Tamara said, have people already written or published any novels and short stories? I'd love to read them. So you guys can shoot Tamara a private message if you'd like him to read your novels and short stories that you've written. And is there anybody that would like to share? You're welcome to raise your hand and we'll call on you. And we realize these are very rough drafts, so don't feel anybody that these need to be perfect. Okay, you have more you want to share with us?
Sure. Oh, I didn't realize it was already unmuted. Okay. I actually put it in the chat, but a colleague of the obstetrician from the first story is trying to buy a house with her husband. The house that, I'm not sure how realistic this is, but the house they want is very popular. She gets to the realtor's office on time, but the husband has trouble getting away from work and arrives 30 minutes late, by which time someone else has already bought the house, and the OB is so angry she's ready to divorce him.
okay. Good. Yeah. I think I feel like listening to all the stories that y'all are sharing, that you're understanding about the links in the novels and stories. And I have to agree with Kay that you read. Reading the novels and stories really will help you understand and see how the threads go through. That's really the best way to learn how to write them and to figure out how they work. So if you're interested in writing a novel and stories, or if you have some short stories that you think could be turned into a novel and stories, then I highly recommend that you read some, maybe some that we mentioned tonight or some that other people mentioned, to get a really good idea of how they come together. I don't know. I do have a checklist here too, for the novels and stories, as you write, to kind of keep you on track. So if you have a collection of short stories that could become a novel and stories, remember to include the triggers that help the reader make the connections. Allow each story division to stand on its own within the thread. Use repeating elements. Find a message or a cause that unifies the stories. Make sure the characters have a shared experience and develop the relationships between the various characters. And then, of course, some of the we didn't go over the other threads, the common threads, like the repeats, but I think it's kind of self-explanatory, and then you can come up with some kind of literary device or something that you want to put in each story that'll be another thread. And then there's something called small world encounters. That's what I call it. But like in the first story of Listen Carefully, March Welch says that his mother is a volunteer at the hospital. And it's just sort of an off remark. But then when we get to the bartender story, when he goes to see his wife who's in the hospital, an elderly woman approaches him and helps him find the right room number. And so you can see that's probably Mark Welch's mother. So it kind of goes back to the Kevin Bacon, put some connect the dots in there and relationships. That's pretty much my whole presentation, but if y'all have any questions, you can certainly email me. I'd be glad to respond.
Wendy asked if you could talk a little bit more about triggers.
Triggers, yes. So triggers are kind of the repeats that appear in the stories to kind of make you remember. So I don't know, sometimes in Debussy's stories, he'll in the first story, he had someone, the wife would lay out by the pool in the afternoon. And it doesn't really matter. You don't really think about it. But then when you got to the bartender, there was someone laying outside getting sun. And then you kind of like, oh yeah, I remember. It was kind of a trigger to the first story that appears in the third story. Sort of things like that, I guess. Some of the repeats that make you think of the other stories that seem like something insignificant, but it triggers something in you to remember what you've already read.
Kay said cameo appearances can be like that and happen in each other's stories too. Cameo appearances from the other people.
That's
And as somebody that's putting together my session for Maryland's North Baltimore Maryland Writers Association this weekend, I want to remind everybody as you're writing how vitally important it is to use sensory imagery to grab your reader and drag them in, because it activates different parts of their brain that actually stores memory. So that when you're writing using sensory imagery, you're tapping into your readers' memories, which is why we tend to value certain authors over others. Not only do we like perhaps their writing style, but it also triggers our own memory centers. So if you want to find out more about that, that'll be Saturday at 11 o'clock. If you guys are in Baltimore, you can join us over at the Maryland Historical Society in Cockeysville, if you're interested in joining us live. And that session will also be on Zoom. I just posted it on Maryland Writers Association, but I'll post it on SWA's site too. And Caroline, this was absolutely a fabulous session. And I know I got a lot out of it. And I know a lot of people did too. I saw everybody frantically writing. And I know that some people are still writing, which is fabulous, which means you really tapped into what you were hoping to do, which is to create kind of this chain of stories for people to be able to write and to be able to feel free. I think this was very freeing to me, because when I look at writing a novel, I think it's overwhelming. But if I could break it into little sections like this and have little stories that are still entwined in some sort of way, it makes it very, very much easier for me to process as a poet. So, and I think it's interesting because I think it, like when you put together an anthology of poetry, you have those connecting threads. So this goes right along with that for me. So, and
Yeah.
we have a lot of thank yous in the chat window from Laura and Kay and Monique and Tamar and Cindy. Awesome presentation, George. Let's see, Wendy has lots of story ideas and says she has a lot of work to do. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on in the chat window, but I wanted to put our hands together and thank Carolyn for such an amazing session, because this was really cool, Caroline. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
gosh. I really appreciate y'all coming and sharing your time with us.
And while you're here, I also wanted to thank you for being an Eastern Shore Writers Association volunteer board member and for helping out our organization from all the way in New Jersey. I think it's fabulous that you come down for Beta Ocean and help us out where you can. And wanted to just thank you for all the time and energy you put into that. So we appreciate you.
Thank you. This is a great organization. I really enjoy interacting with the members and attending the programs.
That's awesome. I love that you've come down for live readings and stuff too. It's really kind of cool. So thanks everybody. And we will return next week with Jen Patonic and Art at Night. And Dylan is on hiatus this week for Get Lit. He said to tell you he will do an amazing session in May for you, but he is handling some other things right now, and he sends his love to everybody that's in the Get Lit crowd. And we also have some really cool stuff coming up for May. At the end of April, we have Ariel Seelig, who is going to join us for a special Saturday session with Eastern Shore Writers Association on the 29th from 1 to 3. And she will be doing a special session on AI. If you are curious and you want to know how to use AI, or if you're fearful of AI and you want to put some of the fears to rest, join Ariel as she teaches us how not to write using AI, but how to use AI to inspire and help our writing and to come up with ideas. And she'll be taking a look at 3 different types of AI that we can use as writers. It looks like it's going to be an absolute fabulous session. You can head on over to Eastern Shore Writers Association if you're interested in that session. And I know I'm talking to a fiction and short story crowd. We have Tommy Dean joining us for a very special session in May, all about short stories, and more information will be coming out in May, or you can check out the newsletter as it comes out. We also have a fabulous short story writer that you may or may not know. His name is Cliff Garstang, and he is absolutely an amazing short story writer. So I know you guys will really, really dig that. We also have a couple of poets joining us. We have Terry Ellen Cross Davis's husband. That's how I'm going to introduce him. He's also a fabulous poet. His name is Hayes Davis, and he was here for Salisbury Poetry Week last year. And we also have Matt Honer joining us, who is the editor, the poetry editor of the Lock Raven Review. So lots of really cool stuff coming up in May. So thanks everybody for a fabulous night. And again, Caroline, what a great session this was. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone.